the Nightmare on Elm Street film. There were articles in the LA Times about Cambodians from our terrible Vietnamese war. We took in many refugees in America because, after the Vietnamese war, and the Cambodians, many of them were sponsored, and they came to the middle of America, and families took care of them. But it was such a different reality from the warm, moist, humid jungles of Cambodia, where you don't have to wear hardly any clothes, to the cold, flat Midwest, that they were dying in their sleep. The Cambodians were literally dying in their sleep from their nightmares because they were so disoriented. And Wes read the article about that, and that was the inspiration for the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Other questions? Anybody over here? Okay, I'm done. Any more questions? Yes? Well, Nightmare 2 is an interesting film. There's some really great sequences in it. But we broke a rule. We broke the rule in Nightmare 2. Freddy left the dream, which you can't do. But there's also a very sophisticated sexual theme to Nightmare 2. If you watch it again, it was ahead of its time. It was really dealing with some suppressed sexuality among some of the characters. And surprisingly, Nightmare 2 did great in Europe. It was a big hit. It was a hit in the States too, but it wasn't as big. It's hard for me to separate the movies sometimes from making them, because the director of that movie, big tall guy named Jack Shoulder, was here at Aberez a couple of times. He directed a great science fiction thriller called The Hidden. Terrific film. With one of the guys from Dune, with the star of Dune. And Jack is such a friend of mine. And he's an editor, he's a director, he's really smart, and he's also a gourmet. He just knows where the best little secret restaurants are. And so making that movie was so much fun for me. That's where I met Kevin Yeager. The great makeup man Kevin Yeager came on board on Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 and did my makeup for many years after that, and invented Chucky. Did The Crypt Keeper on Tales from the Crypt. Produced Sleepy Hollow starring Johnny Depp. So Kevin Yeager was just a terrific influence and friend of my life. So when I think of Nightmare 2, that's what I remember. But we did make mistakes in that movie. We violated some of the rules. So any critic that wanted to get on our ass, I forgive them. More questions? Yes?
What were your thoughts on the Freddy vs. Jason concept?
Well, Freddy vs. Jason had a gestation period. In other words, we were pregnant with that idea for a long time. But some of the critics think we make movies like Freddy vs. Jason or Alien vs. Predator just to get more money out of the fans. Those movies are fan-generated. You guys have to go back in a time machine now. Imagine being alive before World War II. It's 1938, 1939. You're sitting around with your buddies. You've just seen Dracula. You've just seen Frankenstein. You've just seen the Wolfman, and you're sitting around. You're sneaking a beer, and you're 15 years old or 16 years old. You go, hey man, dude, who do you think would win if Freddy threw down with Dracula, man? Well, let's see. If Freddy got in Dracula's game, then he would win. But if Dracula came in the night, then maybe, or what about the Wolfman, man? And they actually made movies. They're classic films where they paired those characters up. At the same time, and you guys know more about comic books than I do, they were doing that in the comics. Superman and Batman, Justice League. So this is a fan-inspired concept. The mixing up of monsters, the mixing of superheroes. This comes from you guys. So I know sometimes the critics want to blame Hollywood a little bit, or blame us, but the idea for Freddy vs. Jason, I first heard that from a fan in 1985. So that's how long that had been around. And what I think is interesting about it, about the film, is Ronnie Yu, being a Hong Kong director from Australia, brought a unique perspective to it. And I think it's very successful as a kind of slightly exaggerated, it's almost like a violent graphic cartoon. You know, it has that sense to it. I think one of the reasons he used Ken Herzinger as Jason, as opposed to my friend Kane Hodder, who has a great new movie coming out, Match It, check it out. But the reason I don't think Kane was in the movie is because Ronnie Yu, the director, he had seen a comic of Friday the 13th where Jason was drawn very tall. And he always wanted a huge Jason. You know, so that's what he wanted. He wanted that size differentiation, you know, big and small, where I would be looking up at Jason and he could have the camera here looking over Jason's shoulder down at me. And that was the idea behind the casting of Ken, to really exaggerate the film. Questions? Yes?
Did you ever have nightmares?
I had a nightmare. Oh, of Freddy?
Yeah.
Only once, and you guys, many of you are serious fans. You've heard this story before, but I'll tell it real quick. I fell asleep about a week after the beginning of the first movie. We were shooting all night. And I'm not used to the makeup. Now I've worn the makeup hundreds and hundreds of times, but back then, I'd probably worn the makeup 4 or 5 times, including the test. And I'm in the makeup, and I was really, in those days, you know, I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't pick my nose. I was real careful, because it was the makeup, you know. Oh, it looks so cool. So I rolled up a towel, put it under my head. It was like 4 in the morning. I took a nap, and Mr. Englund, Robert, we're going to try to get this shot before the sun comes up. It's still dark out. And I was laying on my little cot. I wasn't a star yet. I was laying on my little cot, and right here was a mirror with light bulbs, makeup light bulbs. And I had a dimmer switch, and they were all turned down very low. So it was just a ghost light. And I got up, there's Chris, look at the mirror, oh Jesus, it was Freddy looking right at me in the perspective, and I forgot I was in the makeup. Well, I never wore those underwear again. And that moment, that image of me in the mirror, reflected back at myself. I occasionally dream of that. It was disorienting. I was barely awake. I was half in my subconscious. I had that kind of bad breath you have in the morning. And that little moment, 1001, 1002, 1003, my heart beat.